Good afternoon or good evening, depending on where you might be. My name is Kevin Michael Grace, and this is the KMG show. So, farewell then, Aunt Jemima. Uh, let's see. I suppose I first heard of Aunt Jemima when I was a child, and we would have pancakes, and there would be Aunt Jemima's syrup. And I guess I didn't really know until the last few days just how grossly Aunt Jemima was. Well, she has been canceled. She's a fictional person, of course, based on a real person, or so I'm told. This is from NBC News, and this may be the last day that I source any information from NBC News because it appears to be a branch of Antifa, and I'll talk about that a little later. Anyway, this is from Ben Kesslin. The Aunt Jemima brand of syrup and pancake mix will get a new name and image, Quaker Oats announced Wednesday, saying the company recognizes that Aunt Jemima's origins are based on a racial stereotype. Did they know this a month ago, a year ago, 5 years ago, 10 years ago? Why are they moving on this now? Because a career criminal called George Floyd was killed in Minneapolis. So everything must be upturned. Our lives must descend into chaos because a black man called George Floyd was killed in Minneapolis. The 130-year-old brand features a black woman named Aunt Jemima, who was originally dressed as a minstrel character. The picture has changed over time, and in recent years, Quaker removed the mammy kerchief from the character to blunt growing criticism that the brand perpetuated a racist stereotype that dated to the days of slavery. But Quaker, a subsidiary of PepsiCo, said removing the image and name is part of an effort by the company to make progress toward racial equality. We recognize Aunt Jemima's origins are based on a racial stereotype. Kristen Stewart, Vice President and Chief Marketing Officer of Quaker Foods North America, said in a press release, as we work to make progress toward racial equality through several initiatives, we must also take a hard look at our portfolio of brands and ensure they reflect our values. Brand for continuing to use the image and discussed its racist history. In one viral TikTok, a singer named Kirby, all caps, discussed the history of the brand in a video titled How to Make a Non-Racist Breakfast. She concludes the post that has racked up hundreds of thousands of views across platforms by saying, Black Lives Matter, people, even over breakfast. In a statement to NBC News, Kirby said, there is a sense of relief knowing that my future children will not grow up in a world where their ancestors' oppression is insensitively used as a marketing tool on a box. I hope that other brands swiftly follow suit. Retiring Aunt Jemima matters as a retrograde image of black womanhood on store shelves. Rashay Richardson, an associate professor at Cornell University, told the Today Show on Wednesday. It's an image that harkens back to the antebellum plantation. Aunt Jemima is the kind of stereotype that is premised on this idea of black inferiority and otherness. It is urgent to expunge our public spaces of a lot of these symbols that for some people are triggering and represent terror and abuse. Again, did this symbol trigger terror and abuse a month ago, a year ago, 10 years ago, 20 years ago? No, just now, apparently. I'm afraid I'm like most white people. I associate Aunt Jemima as the corporate spokeswoman or spokes symbol, a friendly-looking black woman who delivers delicious sugary goop to put on your pancakes and waffles. The idea that Aunt Jemima is in any way going to make people feel worse about black people is absolutely absurd. I mentioned this with regard to old cartoons, which are now censored or even suppressed, like the Censored 11. You can look that up. Yes, I grew up watching these cartoons, and apparently this made me hate black people. I saw the famous Cannibal's Pot, and black people and white people in the pot. In no way did I imagine for a second that this was referring in some way to American blacks, and I don't think that anyone did either. However, Dana Ramey Berry, a professor at the University of Texas, said the decision to drop the name and the image of Aunt Jemima is significant because the brand normalized a racist depiction of black women. Perhaps they could replace her with Angela Davis, say, or some other angry black woman. Berry also said it would be misguided to lament the change by Quaker as a loss of representation for black women. The criticism of Aunt Jemima's image, she says, is about the representation, the stereotypical and traumatic and abusive ways in which we are represented. Apparently, showing a smiling black woman on a product is not only stereotypical, but traumatic and abusive. So what else is happening in that regard? Who's about to be canceled as well? This is from USA Today. Add another iconic syrup brand to the list of companies under review. Following decisions by Aunt Jemima and Uncle Ben's to overhaul their imaging in the wake of renewed calls for racial equality, Conagra Brands also announced Wednesday that it has begun a complete brand and packaging review on Mrs. Butterworth's. The Mrs. Butterworth brand, including its syrup packaging, is intended to evoke the images of a loving grandmother, Conagra Brands said in a statement Wednesday. We stand in solidarity with our black and brown communities, and we can see that our packaging may be interpreted in a way that is wholly inconsistent with our values. The company said it understands its actions help play an important role in eliminating racial bias. It's heartbreaking and unacceptable that racism and racial injustices exist around the world, Conagra's statement said. We will be part of the solution. Let's work together to progress toward change. Mrs. Butterworth, is this a joke? It's some old granny. Now, since the syrup is dark, I suppose it could be interpreted as a old black granny. Facial features are not black, although I understand that's a controversial statement to make. Okay, let's get to Uncle Ben's again from NBC News, which I think is going to be put on my do not use list. And again, I've been eating Uncle Ben's products since I was a child. I never thought much about the courtly old gentleman on the box, but he seemed to be proud to deliver us these delicious rice treats. This one is from Doha Madani. The parent company of Uncle Ben's Rice said Wednesday that now was the right time to evolve the brand, including visually, but did not release details of what exactly would change or when. The move follows a similar announcement earlier in the day by Quaker Oats. Mars Inc., the parent company, said in a release that as a global brand, we know we have a responsibility to take a stand in helping to put an end to racial biases and injustices. Racism has no place in society. What's racism? You want to give us a definition that's universally accepted? There isn't one. It's a useless term. It has no efficacy. There will never be an end to racial biases and injustices in any society that seriously attempted to put an end to them would be monstrous, even more monstrous than the society in which we live in today. We stand in solidarity with the black community, and everyone is capitalizing the word black now because the memo went around about a week ago. I don't think white is going to be capitalized, though. We know to make the systemic change needed, it's going to take a collective effort from all of us. That sounds like an order. Individuals, communities, and organizations of all sizes around the world. Uncle Ben's was founded as converted brand rice by co-founders Eric Husenlaub and Gordon Harwell, according to the brand's website. The name Uncle Ben's began being used in the 1940s after Harwell and his business partner discussed a famed Texas farmer referred to as Uncle Ben, known for his rice. The image of the black man in the box was modeled after Frank Brown, a waiter at the Chicago restaurant where Harwell had the idea, according to the website. Critics have pointed out that the problematic use of a black man to be the face of a white company, noting that black men were often referred to as boy or uncle to avoid calling them Mr. during the country's Jim Crow era. Uncle Ben's had a rebranding in 2007 when Mars portrayed the Uncle Ben character as a businessman, according to the New York Times. I just, as anyone who's seen Foghorn Leghorn and the Warner Brothers cartoons, know that young people of any race were referred to as boy. Boy, come here, boy. I said boy. There's nothing particularly racial about it. I'm just thinking that these companies, when you look at the Aunt Jemima and Uncle Ben's, these are known brands. And the knowledge of these brands is it's worth billions of dollars. So apparently they're going to scrap this. And for what, generic rice products? And maybe they could have a picture of a sunset, or maybe just a barcode. Just use the barcode as their brand ambassador. That wouldn't offend anybody, would it? So who else is in trouble today? Flannery O'Connor, Mary Flannery O'Connor, who was an American short story writer and novelist from the South. She died of lupus at the age of 39. And I discussed some weeks ago on my book club one of her novels, Wise Blood. Some creep called Paul Elie is written in the New Yorker on June the 15th, and I read that he is associated with the Catholic magazine Commonweal, which was taken over by creeps decades ago. Yes, apparently she grew up in the South, and apparently she used this word, which is the worst word in the world, which is the, I don't know, the equivalent of a neutron bomb, I suppose. That's how powerful it is. It's not fair to judge a writer by her juvenilia, Ely writes. I guess that's why he brought it up at length. But as she developed into a keenly self-aware writer, the habit of bigotry persisted in her letters and jokes asides, and a steady use of the word, well, I'm not going to mention the word, even though the New Yorker apparently is able to get away with it. For half a century, the particulars have been held close by executives, smoothed over by editors, and justified by exegetes, as if to save O'Connor from herself, unlike, say, the struggle over Philip Larkin, whose coarse, chauvinistic letters are at odds with his lapidary poetry. It's not about protecting the work from the author. It's about protecting an author who is now as beloved as her stories. Yes, Flannery O'Connor has entered the canon, and I guess she's about to be evicted from the canon. Apparently, as a young woman, she was disturbed by the presence of an African-American student in her cousin's class. In Manhattan, she sat between her two cousins on the subway, lest she have to sit next to people of color. The sight of white students and black students at Columbia sitting side by side and using the same restrooms repulsed her. Well, I suppose coming from a society with Jim Crow laws, this is really not unusual at all. But I just, yes. So there's a bit about James Baldwin, where she suggested that James Baldwin would not get a very friendly response in Georgia. No, I can't see James Baldwin in Georgia. She wrote, it would cause the greatest trouble and disturbance and disunion. In New York, it would be nice to meet him. Here, it would not. I observe the traditions of the society I feed on. It's only fair. Might as well expect a mule to fly as me to see James Baldwin in Georgia. I have read one of his stories, and it was a good one. O'Connor lovers have been downplaying those remarks ever since, but they are not hot mic moments or loose talk. They were written at the same desk or O'Connor wrote her fiction and are found in the same load of correspondence that has brought about the rise in her stature. They have put her champions in a bind, upholding her letters as eloquently expressive of her character, but carving out exceptions for the nasty parts. Oh, are exceptions carved out for the many Black artists who have made it clear in their speech, in their correspondence, how much they hate white people? But I suppose they're fully justified in hating white people. The context arguments go like this. O'Connor was a writer of her place and time, and her limitations were those of the culture that had produced her. Forced by illness to return to Georgia, she was made a captive to a Southern code of manners that maintained white superiority over blacks, but her fiction subjects the code to scrutiny. Although she used racial epithets carelessly in her correspondence, she dealt with race courageously in the fiction, depicting white characters pitilessly and creating upstanding Black characters who retain an inviolable privacy. Okay, here's the thing. People have their likes and dislikes, and these include nationalities, they include racial groups. I recall when Mordecai Richler, the Canadian novelist, died some years ago, he was praised to the skies, notwithstanding the fact that Mordecai Richler hated Quebecois. He thought that the women were excellent for sex, but the men were useless. And he wrote of a punishing level of reproduction amongst Quebecois women. I suppose it's the same punishing level of reproduction, if you want to look at it that way, that you would see in Ireland, Spain, Italy, and other Catholic countries at the time. Interestingly enough, I had a correspondence from a Jewish man in Montreal who was familiar with Richler's family. And he said that one of his family was a family of rabbis, and so you could have observed a punishing level of reproduction in Richler's family as well. Richler went so far as to equate Quebecois women with sows. And I asked the question, what kind of animals do sows produce? Well, it's pigs, isn't it? But that didn't stop Mordecai Richler, as I say, from being praised to the skies then and now. And the fact that Mordecai Richler really didn't like the Quebecois, I mean, it doesn't bother me all that much. Dostoevsky is one of my favorite novelists, and people will say Dostoevsky didn't like the Jews. That's true, he didn't like the Jews. He didn't like Poles either. He disliked them just as much as the Jews, and perhaps above all, he hated Catholics. Well, that's not an unusual opinion, particularly in Slavic lands, and it's just part and parcel of the man. I suppose you take the bad with the good, as they say, but apparently that is no longer acceptable. I'm looking at a picture of Chelsea Handler here, and I'm wondering exactly how did this woman get to be so famous? Well, there's various rumors around, and the usual manner of moving forward is suggested in her case. Let's see, there's a piece here by Jonathan S. Tobin from the Jewish News Syndicate. Why can't you get canceled for anti-Semitism? As careers are ruined for often wrongful accusations of racism, Ilhan Omar remains untouchable despite her anti-Semitism. The same will be true for Chelsea Handler. This word anti-Semitism, it's really of not much use, particularly since the official definition, which has been created by various international organizations, and I believe has been it's being pressed on every country in the world to sign on to this, pretty much defines anti-Semitism as any expression that Jews might object to. I believe in Tobin's tweets, he used the word Jew hatred, which really gets to the heart of the matter. He continues, The question is, if it's so easy to cancel someone for not going along with the prevailing orthodoxy about what constitutes racism, why does engaging in anti-Semitism not bring about the same moral opprobrium from the media and the cultural forces taking catechism? Examples abound of instances in which people's careers and lives are being ruined because of the refusal to bend the knee, literally or metaphorically, to a Black Lives Matter movement that is determined to condemn anyone who dissents from their ideology or even question it. One involves Gordon Klein, a professor at UCLA's School of Management, who was placed on leave and had his classes taken away from him after refusing to grant African-American students exemptions from taking final exams because of their collective state of mind after the death of Floyd. The university took that action after angry students accused him of racism and because he had paraphrased Dr. Martin Luther King Jr.'s a famous statement about judging people by the content of their character rather than the color of their skin. Klein, who had taught at the school for 39 years, was doxxed by the students. They made public his email and home addresses and is now under police protection because of death threats. He wasn't alone. Tiffany Riley, a Vermont school principal, was placed on administrative leave for a Facebook post that said while she agreed that Black Lives Matter, she didn't support coercive measures to advance that cause or the demonization of police. Harold Ulig, an economics professor at the University of Chicago, was fired from a consulting job at the Federal Reserve for saying that Black Lives Matter had torpedoed itself by aligning the movement with calls for defunding the police. A mob of outraged economists and journalists led by the New York Times' Paul Krugman wanted Ulig's head on a spike for this offense. Though Ulig had issued a groveling apology for his heresy, note to self, never, ever do that. The Fed acceded to their demand, saying there was no room at the institution for racism, even though the Economist's statement could not credibly be described as such a thing. There are many other examples of similar incidents of people being canceled over dubious accusations of racism, but what is also interesting about what's going on is that far more egregious examples of anti-Semitic hate aren't producing any results. And then he goes on to talk about Chelsea Handler, whose father was Jewish, and she was raised in a Reform Jewish household and had a bat mitzvah. Handler approvingly posted a video of National of Islam hate-monger Louis Farrakhan on her Instagram page this past weekend. Handler said a Farrakhan statement on racism from an old clip from the Phil Donahue show was powerful. Farrakhan is a purveyor of anti-Semitic conspiracy theories and vituperation against Jews. But according to Handler, his comments about the evils of racism directed at blacks deserve to, quote, stand alone, unquote. When a commenter asked her if she would single out for praise some out-of-context statement of Adolf Hitler, she argued that Farrakhan's hate was different because, quote, he is just responsible for his own promotion of anti-Semitic beliefs. They are very different, unquote. In other words, anti-Semitism is just another opinion an otherwise laudable person might hold, not evidence of murderous hate. In the current moral panic about racism, one might have expected a surge of anger directed towards Handler by her colleagues in the entertainment industry, in addition to announcements that indicated that both individuals and companies wouldn't work with her in the future. That didn't happen. Instead, several celebrities, even more famous, such as Jennifer Aniston, Jennifer Garner, and Michelle Pfeiffer, voiced support for Handler. Handler's ability to survive this incident with her career intact shows that myths about Hollywood being controlled by the Jews are nonsense. It's also likely that most Jews in the entertainment industry are either so cowed by the Black Lives Matter movement that they wouldn't dare to act against her or actually agree that anti-Semitism shouldn't disqualify Farrakhan from being considered a respected voice, but the past for anti-Semitism just doesn't exist in the arts. Well, I think it's a little more complicated than Tobin argues. That there are Jewish people out there, a great part of the Jewish elite, who hates whiteness and the idea of whiteness. Now, despite the fact that the overwhelming majority of Jews consider themselves to be white, the Jewish elite increasingly in recent years has made it clear they do not consider themselves white. So Louis Farrakhan is a valued ally because he hates white people and he rages against white people. The fact that he rages against Jews the fact that his black theology is utterly deranged, it doesn't matter to these people because they don't take this sort of thing seriously indeed. I mean, my favorite example of this is Pat Buchanan had a show on MSNBC, and he appeared as a commenter, as a guest on MSNBC shows, and his show was canceled after the publication of one of his books about immigration and the Great Replacement, that this was completely unacceptable. And who was he replaced by? Well, the Reverend Al Sharpton, who fomented two, honest to God, pogroms against Jews in New York, in which people were killed. Louis Farrakhan is, Al Sharpton's fake. He's always been a fake. Well, he's been on Saturday Night Live. Creator of which, executive producer is Lorne Michaels, a Jew. Again, they don't seem to take this sort of thing very seriously, or, they're down with the brothers, so they would never suffer personally. Let's see. The practice of shaming, shunning, and silencing those with unpopular or even offensive views is antithetical to democracy and the free exchange of ideas. Well, you see, apparently Tobin is a liberal, and liberalism itself has been canceled. I've been arguing this for quite some time, and I'm glad to see that I have been vindicated. Of course, the disappearance of liberalism is going to lead to some very serious consequences. But, liberalism believes in a struggle for the truth through argument, free inquiry, that sort of thing. The progressives have all the answers. They don't need to argue with anybody, and anyone who would argue with a progressive is by definition a bad person, a racist, a sexist, a homophobe, transphobe, etc., etc. At the same time, Tobin concludes, it says something truly ominous about our society and culture that questioning the BLM movement, even while avowing that, of course, Black Lives Matter, can destroy a career, while endorsing anti-Semites and even engaging in Jew hatred is not considered a big deal. We already know that the consequences of giving anti-Semites a pass can lead to horror. Apparently, those who pose as supposedly enlightened guardians of our culture have either forgotten that or no longer care about it. Well, I mentioned just a minute ago that a great many of elite Jews no longer consider themselves to be white. And I don't know whether this is going to work, because we hear so much about white privilege, but we never hear about Jewish privilege, because that's subsumed into whiteness. The Jews are a market-dominant minority in the United States, but they seem to all too often resort to claims of being oppressed themselves, which is obviously the opposite of the truth. I find Al Sharpton and Louis Farrakhan abhorrent and also ridiculous. But the fact that Jews or half-Jews like Chelsea Handler think highly of them doesn't surprise me at all, because it's all a kind of triangulation of using various people and various movements to destroy the real bad people who are lower class whites. Those are the people who must be expunged, according to our elite. After all, they elected Donald Trump, and Donald Trump is perhaps, in the great scheme of things, even worse than Hitler. That's what Sarah Silverman, a prominent American Jew, said. Let's go to the chat. Okay. Jonathan Pohl says, I love Aunt Jemima. I saw Professor Pohl's tweets, and he's saying that Aunt Jemima cannot be considered racist because Aunt Jemima black people. Well, you see, that's the way a rational person would argue, but we're not dealing with rational people. YT says they removed the Indian woman from Land O'Lakes butter. Yes, that was, a couple of months ago. And the person who came up with the illustration was quite upset about this, that it is not meant to denigrate Native Indians. Of course it isn't. In the same way, I suppose it could be argued that the Cleveland Indians mascot, Chief Wahoo, denigrates Native Indians. I don't believe it does, or that the name Washington Redskins is offensive. But how long before they come after the symbol of the Chicago Blackhawks, which to my mind is the most beautiful symbol in all of professional sports? But here you have a hockey team owned by white people, which is using the image of a Native Indian warrior. Unacceptable. Bulgarian horticulture specialist, PhD, says, I guess a smiling black woman is offensive. Yes, they have made her smile. Perhaps if it were up to her, she wouldn't be smiling, because we're supposed to believe that black women never smile, that smiling is somehow a gesture of submission. I mean, it can be, but typically it isn't. Let's see. Manfred von Thistlebaum says, isn't that Quaker on the Quaker Oats a racial stereotype? Well, he is certainly a stereotype. Quakers haven't looked like that for centuries. Of course, we're going to talk about racial stereotypes. How about the University of Notre Dame? The team is called the Fighting Irish, and I know that there are some stupid Irish people who consider this to be offensive. And of course, their mascot is a leprechaun. Oh, how very, very demeaning. Thankfully, the University of Notre Dame has not given in to this kind of nonsense. I am of Irish heritage myself. I find it amusing. I find, all the stereotypes to be amusing. The fat, jowly Irish cop, all the rest of it, it doesn't bother me. Why would it bother me? Chokokin 666 says, is the Quaker guy racist against religious extremists? Well, it could be argued that Quakers themselves are religious extremists. Prussian Junker #1 says, anyone else choppy feed? Well, I hope not. Our Finnish friend Jaakko Raipala says, we've already had this purging of brands in Finland. Can't show blondes because that's racist. Idolization of whiteness. Can't show POC because that's stereotyping. I'm guessing that there are quite a few blondes in Finland. I'm reminded of David Mamet's movie Spartan, and the president's daughter, who has been taken into slavery, sexual slavery. She gets rescued by Val Kilmer, and she talks about her father and how her father just uses her as a symbol and has no love for her, ignores her, and that everyone considers her to be, a dumb blonde. I'm just a blonde. And Val Kilmer says, with regard to her being a blonde, that's why you're here. In other words, people love blondes as a rule. Raipala says the SJWs have converged with Islam, can't show any depictions of people now. Yeah, as I say, why not just go with the bar code? Professor Paul says, Aunt Jemima had my family's brand loyalty for decades, no mas. David Wright says, I will buy Hattie McDaniel's syrup now. Yeah, but you see, Hattie McDaniel's was a mammy in Gone with the Wind. As I pointed out, there is no stronger or more principled character, black character in the history of cinema than Hattie McDaniel, the one Hattie McDaniel played in Gone with the Wind. No, but she's in a subordinate position. Of course, in the second half of the movie, she's not in a subordinate position because the slaves have been freed, but she returns to work at Tara because of her love of the O'Hara family, which apparently that would never happen, because why would freed slaves have any fondness for the people who had been their slave masters? Jonathan Pohl, Uncle Ben sold a lot of rice to white people. William Hicks says corporate world is bending over backwards to avoid SJW BLM trouble. At least they're leaving cream of wheat alone so far. I grew up eating cream of wheat. I ate so much of it so that I got sick of it. But isn't there a black man with a chef's hat? Isn't he their corporate spokes symbol? Metal Mike says, I'll add to my collection alongside the General Lee model car. Well, I understand that the Dukes of Hazzard is in very serious trouble. I suppose it's, it's running on streaming services. But, the Confederate flag, General Lee, etc., etc., etc. Let's see. Orkandak Sultanov says, just escaped from Luke's. Kyle is back tomorrow. I'm going to be speaking about young Kyle in a little while. I would have thought that the momentous events of 2020 might have knocked some sense into him, but nope, he remains unaffected. Uncle and aunt, black people for some reason in the United States pronounce it aunt, are terms of respect in West Africa. It is much more respectable than Mr. and Mrs., says Professor Paul. Uncle KMG's cream of wheat. Yeah, I don't think that anyone will want to use my likeness on a box of food. I very much doubt it. Will the Black Death be renamed? It's possible. It's possible. I'm reminded again. Well, let's have another pop culture reference from me on Community. When I'm trying to remember the actor's name, of course he was in The Thing and he was in They Live, and he does a lot of narration for PBS and the like. And he joined the Community cast, I think, in season 5. And everyone is around the table and they're talking. They fall silent, and he's been doing something else, and he says, oh, wait, am I supposed to give you my permission to use the word black in a negative connotation? Yeah, he didn't have a problem with it. Okay, let's see. Alphabet keyboard. You push in, insert, and it goes. Ooh, yeah. Okay. Okay. King Raz, Le Comte de Bray says King Raz is the product of abundance, excess, and the most prosperous civilization the world has ever witnessed. Yeah, I was talking about that with someone today, that if you look at so much of the nonsense in our society, the parasitic nonsense, affirmative action is one example, but there are many other. Poetry slams, performance art, modern art, of all kinds, Damien Hirst and the Saatchi School, if you will. Feminism in the workplace. We could survive this because of the surplus generated by capitalism. Now, I'm not going to split hairs here. I'm just going to choose the year 2008 as a starting point. Now, I know the Austrians are going to say, yes, economic growth, so-called, has all been based on an increase in credit since the 1970s, and I tend to agree. But for purposes of argument, I'm going to say that the surplus generated by capitalism disappeared in 2008. Now, one would think that this would have knocked some reality into people, but no, quite the opposite. And I formulated Grace's law of the paradoxical response. We saw this with AIDS. We saw it after 9/11. And, we're seeing it now with Black Lives Matter, that we don't have the money for this nonsense anymore. It's gone. But of course, what we're getting is even more of the nonsense because we are no longer rational people. Oh, let's see. Edward Richards says Harper Lee is getting the axe, like Twain, another white American whose work is defined by its critique of racism. Yeah, I don't know. I suppose, acceptable. But they did the best they can under the circumstances, but it is not good enough. It's not good enough. And I suppose there's a kind of, you could say that To Kill a Mockingbird is patronizing because of the condition of the Black characters in the novel. But of course, it reflected reality, but we're not allowed to reflect reality. There's a long-standing rumor you may have heard of that Harper Lee did not, in fact, write To Kill a Mockingbird, that it was Truman Capote. Of course, I may be confusing that with Carson McCullers. She was a one-book writer, as I believe Harper Lee was. Okay, so Tom Anderson says, probably going to see a nationwide cop strike soon. Buddy says, the Atlanta police are walking out tonight, apparently. Head McNeck says, capitalism will consume BLM just as it's consumed all other threats. Within 2 years, we'll see Betty Crocker's new Black Lives Matter at Walmart. I like that. I like that. That cop getting charged with murder is really the last straw. No law anymore, writes Walrus Libertarian. I will be getting to that shortly. Okay. Are we getting to it? No, not quite. We're not quite there yet. Okay, so who else has been canceled? I don't watch any of these home improvement shows. I don't watch any of the cooking shows, but I know that a lot of people do. Below Deck Mediterranean star Peter Hunziker fired by Bravo for posting shockingly racist and degrading sexual imagery, with forthcoming episodes recut to minimize his appearance. I don't know what this is. I suppose it's about a reality show about a boat, a yacht. And the bosun is a woman, a white woman, and apparently this fellow had gotten into trouble for calling her sweetie and sweetheart, which is completely unacceptable. He had been reprimanded on screen for calling his boss that. Now, her name was Amalia, and I thought, oh, a black woman. Okay, I get it. But no, I looked her up, and she is a black woman. It was pointed out to me that the woman who is in grave difficulty at ABC News, who's effectively been canceled, despite claiming all of the work she'd done, all of her inclusiveness, her name was Fadida, which is an Arab name, but it turns out that she was born Brill. So she is actually Jewish. Whenever they said, I hear the shocking, just shocking, shocking, shocking. Well, what's so shocking about it? The post, seen by dailymail.com, appeared to be a reposted meme that depicted shocking racist and degrading sexual imagery that showed a naked black woman in shackles. Okay. I spoke about someone getting hoisted by his own petard yesterday, Rick Wilson. And Rick Wilson is in serious trouble himself now because his son, he made a cooler decorated with the Confederate battle flag. And on the top, it says, "The South will rise again." And Rick Wilson took a picture of this and put it on Instagram. And someone named Caleb Hull, described as a strategy and viral content, working with nonprofits, campaigns, influencer, 4+ billion views on conservative videos. He had a lot of fun with Rick Wilson and his wife because this is all over the place. The South will rise again. Sad day at the Wilson house. A new account called Rick Wilson's Racist Cooler. Sad day at the Wilson house. A lot of tears were shed. I'm not angry. I know they still love me, but my existence hurts the grift that the family depends on to make ends meet. So here I am, kicked to the curb, but I will rise again. Now, it would appear that fairly recently, Rick Wilson, who is a bitter, perhaps the bitterest of the Never Trumpers, although of Tom Nichols, Major Tom, gives him a run for his money. But they just got in deeper and deeper and deeper, denying that any of this had happened. And, there were screenshots there. And, of course, he got blocked. But seeing this happen to Rick Wilson is really a delight. Caleb Hull tweeted, "Oh, you thought the saga was over? Nope." Rick Wilson's wife continued to DM me, then admitting that the photo of the Confederate cooler was not fake, as she previously claimed. After I responded, she blocked me. And he found a 9-year-old tweet from his wife. She calls herself Molly X. "This is going to sound bad, but I need some Mexicans for about 3 days to work in my garden." And Caleb Hull responded, "Well, I have you here. Can you explain your thought process in this tweet?" And more, please. Faster, faster. "Show me the man and I will show you the crime. And there is not a person on earth who cannot be had for making grossly inappropriate, shocking statements." At the time they were made, they might not have been shocking or even grossly inappropriate or even inappropriate. But everyone will be caught in the web. And seeing as I'm an unrepentant thought criminal, there's really not much that can be done to me. I remember reading John Derbyshire, what was this, like 15, 20 years ago? And I suppose this was something of a revelation to me. I never really thought of it. He said, in any Fortune 500 or Fortune 1000 company, if you have a group of minority employees, they will sue the company. It is inevitable. They will sue the company and they will be paid off. The suit will be settled every single time. And of course, having sued the company and the company having settled with them means that they will be promoted up, 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 up. And of course, this is what's happened. This is how the police chief of Minneapolis got his job. You claim racial discrimination, you get a settlement, and you are tipped for the top. A very sad story from the New York Times. She spent 16 years as Morgan Stanley's diversity chief. Now she's suing. Wow, I didn't see that one coming. 16 years as Morgan Stanley's diversity chief. How many hundreds of thousands of dollars or millions of dollars a year did Marilyn Booker make for doing this? How many stock options did she get? Diversity chief. Wow, that is a sweet gig if you can get it. This is from Emily Flitter. During Marilyn Booker's 26-year career at Morgan Stanley, including 16 years as the bank's global head of diversity, she often felt that too few of its employees were Black. She was still trying to rectify the situation right up till the morning in December when she was fired. Booker, who was Black, is now suing Morgan Stanley and her former boss, Barry Krauk, Chief Administrative Officer for the Wealth Management Division, for racial discrimination and retaliation. She believes she was fired because she pushed too hard to get senior executives in that division to embrace her plan to restructure a program for training Black financial advisors. She thought the restructuring would help more recruits succeed. Racial discrimination suits against Wall Street banks are not new. Within the last 15 years, nearly every major bank has settled a class action for tens or even hundreds of millions of dollars. But Booker is one of the highest profile Black employees to pursue legal action against a bank in recent years. It would be nice to see one of these companies say, no, we're not going to settle, and we're going to fight this to the bitter end, because we have lots and lots of money. Actually, we're in a position to create our own money. We make credit, and then it is backed with the full power of the United States Treasury. That is a sweet position to be in. Booker joined Morgan Stanley in 1994. She was the public face of the bank's efforts to diversify, representing it at a hearing in Congress. In 2011, she moved to the firm's wealth management arm, where she started a group, Urban Markets. Ooh, urban. Problematic. Which sought to win more Black money management clients and help Black communities build wealth, a role she held until she was fired. At first, Booker tried to handle her separation from the firm quietly. Sure she did. She continued to offer help and advice to Black employees who reached out to her. But this month, as she watched the nationwide protests over police brutality and the widespread inequality that Black Americans endure, she decided it was time to speak up. Her lawyers filed suit Tuesday in federal court in Brooklyn, New York. Oh, I see. Yes, this inequality that Morgan Stanley, which is one of the most powerful institutions in the world, has for 26 years says, please, please, Black people, work for us, Black people. Good jobs, excellent, high paying. Come on, Black people, please work for Morgan Stanley. And this just proves that Morgan Stanley is a terribly racist place, because apparently not enough Black people took them up on the offer. Oh, well, one could argue that maybe they weren't suitable in some way. They didn't, come up to the standards necessary. Well, that would be racist, because that assumes that Black people are not Morgan Stanley material. There is a school of thought on the right that since companies like Morgan Stanley are part of woke capital, well, they are woke capital, that the Alinsky trick should be used on them. Make them live up to their own positions. Why don't you have a Black CEO? Why don't you have a Black president? Why don't you have a Black COO? Why don't you have a Black CTO? What percentage of your management is Black? Just stick it to them. Make it compulsory. If they believe in wokeness, well, they can be woke. They can be practically woke. And I think this is quite a good idea. I mentioned the British soap opera Hollyoaks, and just the turmoil never ends. It will begin a phased return to filming on July 13th, despite other shows like Emmerdale and Coronation Street getting back to work on socially distanced set in May. How does that work? Socially distanced sets. Come a little closer, baby. No, I can't. Social distancing. Show representatives say it will be another month before cameras will start to roll once more. All cast and crew will attend a safety induction to familiarize themselves with the revised way of working prior to production restarting. The publication, this is the London Sun, claimed the delay to restart filming comes after stars reportedly threatened to quit the Channel 4 soap amid the show's racism row. On Tuesday, the cast were said to be at war following Rachel Adedeji's accusations of behind-the-scenes racism and claims that co-star Lisa Anthony, who is white, is actual trash. Hollyoaks has been hit by several controversies this week after Malik Thompson Dwyer faced backlash for attending an illegal rave in Daisy Nook Park, Failsworth, while Stephanie Davis revealed she had quit the show. Bosses are now reportedly having a string of meetings as there is a real divide between the cast. There is a lot of tension over Lizette's recent comments. Some cast have threatened to quit if something isn't done about it. Well, Lisette is out. She quit. They got rid of the white woman. Isn't that enough? And with Stephanie and Rachel quitting, bosses are worried others will follow them out of the door. It's utter chaos. Every week, it's some new issue. I suppose the producers of the show said, well, thank you for your service. We wish you luck in trying to find a job in show business now. You know, what with all the theaters closed, maybe permanently, and all the movie actors moving into television, I guess the competition's going to be a little stiffer. But once again, good luck. Okay, let's talk about America's latest hero, America's latest saint. His name is Richard Brooks. Daniel Horowitz, who is always good, writing in the Conservative Review, says BLM, blood libels matter. They matter because when a dangerous lie criminalizing all police and victimizing every black criminal is allowed to metastasize, it turns America into a violent, lawless nation, harming the very people that movement purports to champion. The new rioting over what appears to be an act of self-defense on the part of an Atlanta cop demonstrates that this movement was never about justice for George Floyd. The reason why the video showing the killing of George Floyd sparked so much outrage is precisely because it was so anomalous in police encounters. The video appears to show Minneapolis cop Derek Chauvin kneeling, presumably with a lot of pressure, on Floyd's neck for 9 minutes in a contained situation long after Floyd had been subdued. Well, now we know that the outrage was not over that anomalous act. What the latest blood libel in Atlanta demonstrates is that those pushing the lie seek to criminalize basic police work and lionize career criminals who needlessly escalate arrests into violent altercations. Cops who shot Richard Brooks dead is fired as body cam shows the black man talking to politely to cops was the headline the Daily Mail used. Richard Brooks was shot and killed when he was merely asleep on the passenger side and not doing anything, proclaimed NAACP Vice President Gerald Griggs. Well, either Gerald Griggs has not been paying attention to this or he is a liar. AP tweeted body camera footage released by Atlanta police shows Richard Brooks appearing good-humored and largely cooperative with two white officers for about 40 minutes during an encounter that ended with Brooks being fatally shot by police. So what happened, between the good-humored conversation and the fatal shooting? Any sane person watching this video will realize that, yes, the police were very amicable to him, but that all changed when Brooks violently resisted arrest and grabbed the taser from one of the cops on the scene. You can clearly see in the video that the cop drew his gun only when the fleeing Brooks turned around and fired the taser at him. Clearly, this case is in line with the vast majority of police shootings of both black and white suspects and many of the others that the media turned into a blood libel against the cops, such as the Michael Brown case in Ferguson, Missouri in 2014. It was clear self-defense, and had the suspect been white, we never would have heard of it. The cop wouldn't have been fired, and rioters wouldn't have burned down the Wendy's where the shooting occurred, nor would they have blocked an interstate. And frankly, had they done so, the power of government would have immediately crushed their actions. I'm seeing some commentators who clearly concede the self-defense point, but lament that something so low-level, such as a drunk driver blocking the Wendy's drive-thru, could result in a death. Yes, it is tragic. This is what many cops have to deal with regularly. Many violent career criminals are often caught committing low-level crimes. Cops approach them as if they are innocuous, just as in this case, where clearly the cops treated him as just someone who'd had too much to drink. But there's something interesting about violent criminals who barely serve time for past offenses. They are not deterred from acting violent again. Cops never know when someone is going to turn violent on them. In this case, Brooks had an extensive criminal record, which included violent criminal charges in Georgia. And let's go right to that. Let's see, he was born in 1993, so roughly 27 years old. Major offense, false imprisonment. That's a pretty serious crime, 2014. Let's see, 2014, simple battery. 2014, cruelty to children. False imprisonment, family violence battery. These are all 2014. Theft by receiving stolen property in 2013. Criminal interference with government property in 2013. Obstruction of a law enforcement officer in 2013. Apparently there's no 3 strikes and you're out rule in the state of Georgia, because it turns out that this fellow did not spend very much time in prison at all. Very little time at all. Oh, there's more. Weapons possession, possession of marijuana, an ounce. Weapons possession and other weapons possessions, felony cruelty, Another felony cruelty. Wow. Speeding, theft by taking. There appear to be, a dozen or so convictions? That's an awful lot. He also appears to have had a criminal record dating back to 2010 when he was a juvenile, along with numerous parole violations. The system really gave him a lot of grace. According to the Atlanta Journal-Constitution, he was working for a restoration company in Toledo, Ohio. The paper doesn't say when he worked there, but the company evidently put out a message on Instagram praising him. And I'm not going to read it because it goes on forever, but apparently he was just the bestest man in the United States of America. Horowitz comments, could Brooks have been running from the law? He appears to have served only 4 months of a 7-year sentence in 2014 for charges and convictions of simple battery, cruelty to children, false imprisonment, family violence battery, receiving stolen property, criminal interference with government property, weapons charges, and obstructing a law enforcement officer. It looks like there were numerous probation violations until a parole officer issued a warrant for his arrest on December 20th, 2018, when he had fled to Ohio. It's not clear why he wasn't put back in prison when he was returned to Georgia this past January, but it does appear he was supposed to report to the Clayton County Probation Office and was scheduled for a February 5th parole revocation hearing. What I'm hearing is that, the reason he expected the police to let him go. When they did not let him go, this is when he grabbed the taser because he realized that he was almost certainly going to go back to prison. Thus far, the media has been silent about his record and has lauded him as the ultimate family man. ABC News did an interview with his employer in Toledo and praised him as dedicated to hard work in his family for moving to Ohio in spring of 2019 to support them. They failed to mention that he already had an arrest warrant in December 2018, and perhaps that is why he left the state. They failed to mention the original underlying crime of family violence and cruelty to a child. Okay, so let's get to the arrest. This is from the Daily Mail. Arrest warrants have been issued for officers Garrett Rolfe, 27, and Devin Brosnan, 26. Both men must turn themselves in by 6 p.m. Thursday. Brooks was shot twice in the back by Rolfe on June 12th in Atlanta. Rolfe has been charged with 11 counts, including felony murder, a charge that carries a possible sentence of life without parole, or the death penalty. Brosnan faces 3 charges, including aggravated assault, and has agreed to testify against Rolfe, becoming a state witness. Whatever happened to the donkey code? So it's interesting. The thing that's happened this year is that, typically, I remember being very excited when CNN started because I've always loved the news. And of course, you don't get very much news on your half hour or even your hour-long newscast. And I thought, 24-hour news, this is going to be great. There's going to be so many stories that you don't see on TV. Well, the same handful of stories over and over again, every hour or every 2 hours. And nothing new has happened. To just repeat what they said, or they just run the same tape. When the BBC started its rolling news service, I thought, well, this is the BBC. It's going to be better, but it was essentially the same as CNN. The same news repeated endlessly. But what we've seen in 2020 is there's all of this news coming at us from every direction, and there are constant updates. Now, typically, you have to go to Twitter to get these updates because the media won't cover them. Even, the Chop Shop in Seattle. I mean, this is an interesting story, is it not? There's all of these unexplored angles, like what's happening with the businesses in that area? How about the people who live there, who have apartments there? How are they bearing up? Are they angry? Are they being harassed by the people in the Seattle Autonomous Zone? Mark Gonsalves tweets to Atlanta Mayor Keisha Lance Bottoms, and I just can't stop laughing at that name. With all the Atlanta cops walking off the job, will you be patrolling neighborhoods? This is from Rob O'Donnell. My contacts in the Atlanta Police Department informed me that members from Evening Shift Zone 4 walked off the job, shortly followed by officers in Zone 3 and 6. The good members of the Atlanta Police will not stand for Fulton County DA's activism in place of applying the law. Jack Posobiec had tweeted, good cops are going to walk off the jobs after this. The political class is pandering to the mob and trying to persecute officers for every issue in the world. Cultural revolution. And, it has been pointed out that more white people are killed by police in the United States than black people, not just in total numbers, but proportionately as well. And there are many infamous cases of white people being killed by police for trifles, essentially, or nothing. But they don't get very much publicity for obvious reasons. Now, this is a story by Jim Bovard. I've interviewed Jim Bovard several times. He's an old-fashioned civil libertarian. I mean, he really means it. So I have respect for him in that regard. He writes in the American Conservative, perhaps the most outrageous police killing of the year continues to be almost completely ignored by the American media. Montgomery County, Maryland politicians and government officials have loudly lamented police killings in Minneapolis and elsewhere, while continuing to cover up a no-knock raid that is difficult to distinguish from an extrajudicial killing. Since banning so-called no-knock raids has been included in the new House Democratic proposal for police reforms, let's take a look at a recent one that ended in the death of a 21-year-old man. At 4 a.m. on March 12th, the Montgomery County Police SWAT team commenced a no-knock raid by firing into a bedroom window and fatally wounding Duncan Lemp as he lay in bed next to his pregnant girlfriend. Police then stormed the house using flashbangs to intimidate Lemp's mother and other relatives living in the house. Lemp bled to death while family members were handcuffed on the floor nearby. Lemp was a savvy IT guy who was volunteering to assist gun rights groups in setting up secure websites and communication systems. But Lemp had no security to protect himself against police bullets coming through his bedroom window before dawn that morning. During the raid, police officers repeatedly shouted at family members that everything they said and did was being recorded. However, Montgomery police may have either destroyed any videos or never made a recording. On June 5th, lawyer Renee Sandler, representing the Lemp family, sent a letter to Montgomery County Prosecutor Haley Roberts, quote, "We've been advised that Police Chief Marcus Jones made an on-the-record statement that no body cameras existed for the raid of the Lemp home and the killing of Duncan Lemp," unquote. Sandler sought confirmation that the raid video footage existed and requested its immediate release. She received no response. After seeing the Sandler letter, I emailed Montgomery County Chief Executive Mark Elrich and Montgomery County Police Chief Marcus Jones asking, can you confirm or deny that there is no body cam footage of the Lemp shooting? I received no reply. I sent the same question multiple times to County Prosecutor Roberts, the same lawyer who threatened Lemp's parents if they attended a protest over his killing at County Police Headquarters in April. Roberts replied on June the 12th, this matter is an open criminal investigation being handled by the Howard County State's Attorney Office, and as such, any inquiry should be directed to that office. The cover-up of the Lemp killing is being aided and abetted by the Orwellian-named Law Enforcement Trust and Transparency Act, which the County Council enacted last year. Montgomery County and Howard County have an agreement to conduct reciprocal investigations of police shootings. Individuals I've spoken to involved in this case have zero confidence in the independence of the Howard County investigation, which conveniently permits Montgomery County officials to shirk all questions. Perhaps some months or a year or two from now, an official report will reveal the following, quote, we investigated our law enforcement friends and neighbors and found out that they did nothing wrong except for a glitch where one policeman's finger accidentally bumped a trigger and inadvertently killed a dastardly gun owner who was also guilty of tweeting the Constitution is dead. Now, there's a rumor going around that some Antifa group fingered Lemp, claiming that he was a neo-Nazi or whatever, and even if he had been a neo-Nazi, I don't really understand how this justifies a no-knock raid and a bullet through a bedroom window. But I used to follow these cases for years and years and years. I mean, Reason Magazine is full of them. It has been, since the late 80s or whatever? There are hundreds of such cases, and as I pointed out before, these no-knock raids typically result because some prison snitch is looking for a deal, and so he makes up some story that some respected citizen is actually a big-time drug dealer, and that, 3 or 4 or 5 or 6 different police agencies all get together, and there's tons of guns, tons of armor, and tons of helmets, and tons of flashbangs, and doors being kicked down, and anything that moves gets shot. But since it's white people being killed, and their families being terrorized, and their dogs being shot to death, I guess that's simply not very important. So what's next up for cancel culture? James Dellingpole writes in The Spectator, 7 problematic films that are yet to be canceled. Number 1, Avatar, white people helping blue people. Number 2, Ace Ventura, Pet Detective, the villain is a transsexual. Number 3, Zulu, 1964, one of the most thrilling war films, one of the most thrilling films, period, ever made. Well, it's white people fighting black people in Africa. Number 4, Indiana Jones and the Temple of Doom. Problematic portrayal of Asian people who consume disgusting foods. Number 5, Love Actually. The king of the genre of film I call Blairite porno is rife with questionable scenes, from the fat shaming of Natalie to the stalkerish Mark, who attempts to break up a beautiful interracial marriage, to the abuse of the client domestic relationship by Jamie, particularly as he was 16 years older than his love interest. Number 6, Aladdin. Agrabah is a place where they cut off your ear if they don't like your face. A line later replaced, but see also, it's barbaric, but hey, it's home. A fetishized Middle East where fire eaters, pet tigers, and scimitar-wielding thugs abound. And finally, number 7, Dirty Harry. If ACAB, all cops are bastards, a common anarcho-communist mantra oft repeated at BLM protests, I'm not sure exactly what we've made of Harry Callahan, a dirty cop who imposes his own version of rough justice and who would probably view the mantra as a compliment undeserved by most cops. I love Dirty Harry. You should see it on a big screen TV and Blu-ray because it was one of the Surtees who was the DP on this film, and the Surtees, they like shadows, they like chiaroscuro, and the movie is typically murky, or used to be on TV, and as I say, when you watch it on the Blu-ray, it's a revelation. It's like chalk and cheese. J.K. Rowling, as we know, is in very serious trouble, and a publishing staff working on J.K. Rowling's latest book threatened to down tools. Down tools. What, they threatened to walk away from their laptops? Down tools yesterday in protest at her views on gender. The Harry Potter author, 54, has endured a storm of protests since expressing deep concerns about transgender activism in an essay last week in which she also described being a victim of domestic violence and sexual assault. Those criticizing her have included movie stars she helped make famous. It led to headlines such as Bonfire of J.K. Rowling as the multi-million-pound empire she created threatened to turn against her. Yesterday morning at publishing house Hachette, several of those involved in Miss Rowling's new children's book, The Ichabod, are said to have staged their own rebellion during a heated meeting. One source said staff in the children's department at Hachette announced they were no longer prepared to work on the book. Hachette is one of the world's biggest publishers. They are a behemoth. And for once, I'd like to see one of these companies say, oh, I see. You no longer believe that it is morally right for you to work for Hachette. Well, that's a shame. Thank you for your service. Don't let the doorknob hit your ass on the way out. Good luck finding another job in the publishing industry right now. Things aren't so great. But no. And Hachette has said that, no, we would never force people to work on books that they didn't like. Really? Because I suspect that editorial employees at publishing firms think that a great many of the books that their companies publish, or perhaps most of them, are absolute rubbish. But that's their job. An insider, supposedly said they were opposed to her comments and wanted to show support for the trans lobby. These staff are all very woke, mainly in their 30s, 20s and early 30s, and apparently it is an issue they feel very strongly about. Another insider said it was a handful of staff and they are entitled to their views. If they were being asked to edit a book on domestic abuse and they were a survivor of domestic abuse, of course, they would never be forced to work on it. But this is a children's fairy tale. It is not the end of the world. They will all be having chats with their managers. I mean, this is absolutely nonsense. Oh, I can't work on this book anymore. Why not? Well, it's about a bad marriage. And I was in a bad marriage. I can't work on this book. Why not? Well, the pivotal scene in the book, what sets the ball rolling is when the man is crossing, our hero is crossing the street and he's knocked down by a car. And I was once knocked down by a car. I mean, there's no end to this. I can't work on this book. Why not? It's about a bad father. And I had a bad father. Such precious people. Last night, Hachette issued a statement backing Ms. Rowling's right to express herself. It said, quote, "We are proud to publish J.K. Rowling's children's fairy tale, The Ichabod. Freedom of speech is the cornerstone of publishing. We fundamentally believe that everyone has the right to express their own thoughts and beliefs. That's why we never comment on our author's personal views, and we respect our employees' right to hold a different view. We will never make our employees work on a book whose content they find upsetting for personal reasons, but we draw a distinction between that and refusing to work on a book because they disagree with an author's views outside their writing, which runs contrary to our belief in free speech." They're a bunch of bloody hypocrites. Because the same woke army said, we don't want to work on Woody Allen's book. You can't publish Woody Allen's book. Why not? Because his estranged son makes these claims. And Dylan, Dylan and the other one, he wasn't allowed to fact check the book. Are you kidding me? This does not happen in publishing. Someone who is, books are read for libel. And, well, they're read for, factual errors. I suppose they'd be read for incitement. The opinions expressed by an author in a memoir are really no one else's business. The idea that Woody Allen's son would be given veto power over his father's book is absolutely preposterous. But you see that Hachette established a precedent there. And I hope they choke on it. In more publishing news, I'm not going to talk about this for very long. This is, John Bolton is a bad man. He's a neocon, and all neocons are bad men and women. Don't forget the women. There's a lot of bloodthirsty women amongst the neocons. And so, look, I predicted before Trump was elected that he was going to have grave difficulty filling up his cabinet and choosing advisors for the reason that Trump is not part of the elite. But he needs to find people who are in some way, competent, experienced, etc. So he's going to have to go into the elite to find these people. And for some reason, he decided to hire evil Captain Kangaroo, John Bolton, as his national security advisor. And this has ended very badly. Let's see. John Bolton's bombshell book, of which he may be sued by the U.S. government, says Donald Trump offered personal favors to dictators he liked, begged China's President Xi to help him with the 2020 election, and gave him the go-ahead to build Muslim concentration camps. Turkey's Recep Erdogan wanted probe of Turkish bank ended. And he writes that Trump pleading with China's president to buy U.S. agricultural products and described it in electoral terms, says Xi Jinping should go ahead with building camps the regime was constructing for Chinese Uyghurs. Writes Trump believed Finland was part of Russia. Well, it was part of Russia for quite some time. Pattern of fundamentally unacceptable behavior that eroded the very legitimacy of the presidency. Oh, derp, derp, derp. It's all lies. Oh, okay. Yeah, let's talk about the free market. Let's talk about the First Amendment, the Constitution of the United States. What's the purpose of the First Amendment? It is to preserve political speech. It's not meant so that people could masturbate on a stage with the like. No, First Amendment is about political speech. So the founders of the United States drafted amendments to the Constitution, which were designed to protect people who speak about politics. There were no monopolistic tech firms in those days. There was no tech. There were pamphleteers, mostly, some newspapers, and people standing on soapboxes in the like in public parks. This is from Fox Business. Google blocks Zero Hedge from ad platform, warns the Federalist over comment sections. Zero Hedge is a website that deals mostly in financial matters. All of its contributions are attributed to Tyler Durden, who, of course, is a fictional character. It is I suppose you could say it's a right-wing site. It's been accused of being pawns of Putin, but haven't we all been accused of being pawns of Vladimir Putin? The Federalist is a good taste conservative site. I'm sure they call themselves conservative, although that term is denatured and useless. They were anti-Trump in 2016. They were never Trump, I guess. And Sean Davis, who was part of this controversy, blocked me on Twitter because I had some great fun with his peevishness over Trump's victories in the Republican primaries. Zero Hedge comment section consistently violated Google's dangerous and derogatory policy, tech giant says. Google said it demonetized Zero Hedge after the company's review teams found that statements posted in the website's comment section consistently violated Google's dangerous and derogatory policy, as others have pointed out. Hey, who owns YouTube? Google does, which is owned by Alphabet. Have you ever looked at the comments on YouTube videos? They are an absolute cesspool. They make one despair of humanity. I've looked at a lot of instructional guitar videos, people talking about instruments, people showing you how to play complicated passages from, certain songs, or you have piano virtuosos, captured on film. This is rubbish. He stinks. He's the worst, and stuff far, far grosser than that. It's just, you can hardly go to a YouTube video with any level of popularity without coming to the conclusion that a very large proportion of the population is evil and or insane. But somehow they seem to be able to get away with it. In an interview on Fox, Christopher Bedford, the Federalist senior editor, responded to the Google decision. What I can say for certain is that NBC News changed their story, and Google was very, very quick to shut it down. The question is whether or not Google is actually on the side of truth in this matter, whether Google is just in retreat after a very clumsy attack. Sean Davis, aforementioned Sean Davis, was on Tucker Carlson's show. He said, since we have temporarily removed our comment sections, I can assure you they will be back. We are back in Google's good graces. But this is a pretty terrifying example of the power that you have of the unholy union of corrupt media and monopolistic tech oligarchs. NBC appeared to have connected Google's ban to research from the Center for Countering Digital Hate, a UK-based think tank, which reportedly found 10 U.S. publications projected to make millions through Google ads that have published content the center labeled as racist in light of George Floyd's killing and the protests that have followed. Those publications allegedly included The Federalist and Zero Hedge. And there is a tweet here for someone who works from NBC, who is actually called Adele-Momoko Fraser. She appears to be a pale-skinned white woman. New from NBC_VC, thanks to SFF fake news and CCD hate for their hard work and collaboration. So apparently networks, companies like NBC Universal, which is owned by Comcast, are now content to be conduits for Antifa or Antifa adjacent activists. Imran Ahmed, CEO of the Center for Countering Digital Hate, told NBC that his research organization found that lots of companies are inadvertently funding the 10 publications the center identified as publishing content that is outright racist. Neither Ahmed nor NBC specified the names of the other 8 outlets included in the center's research. Yes, and Adele Momoko Fraser, I guess she thought, implications. She says, to clarify the earlier tweet, we obtained this research exclusively from SF Fake News, but we did not collaborate on the research itself. Well, that's good to know. That's good to know. I worked in journalism, and you would get accusations about people, organizations, and one of the first questions you'd ask is, or you'd do some research, do these people have a grudge against the people they're accusing? Is there a vendetta going on? Do these people have a vested interest? And stop funding fake news apparently is in the United Kingdom. Doing the job Google should have done in the first place. That's a quote from Private Eye magazine, and just goes to show how left-wing Private Eye has become under the editorship of Ian Hislop. Okay, so there is a piece by Christopher Bedford in The Federalist responding to the controversy. Corporate America's strategy of mob appeasement will destroy it, just as it always has. And they talk about the Marilyn Booker case. Look, Marilyn Booker is going to be given millions of dollars. Morgan Stanley has many billions of dollars. This is the price of business. Just as all the laws they break, all the federal laws they break, terrorism laws, money laundering laws that they break, they get fined billions of dollars. It's just the cost of doing business. I don't believe that corporate America's strategy of mob appeasement will destroy it. I see no evidence of that whatsoever. Oh, here we get to my old friend, Kyle Rowland, my former broadcasting partner. And Kyle is very upset that there are now calls for regulation, for changes in the DMCA. He quotes Tucker Carlson. It's been clear for a very long time that the big tech monopolies have now surpassed the federal government as the chief threat to our liberties, unquote. He responds, nonsense. Your speech is freer here than anywhere else with nationwide reach. I don't know exactly what that means. Freer here? Does he mean in the United States? Does he mean on Twitter, perhaps? So David Pinson responded, you should go on KMG Victoria and make the Mike Lee / Libertarian Silicon Valley toady case. And it just gets into very weird stuff here. He writes, Kyle writes, why do we ask Mike Lee for Utah? Because he chairs the Antitrust Subcommittee. He's the man who could do something to protect you from Google. Instead, he has taken the side of the big tech companies. Why is he still in the Senate? Kyle responds, this populist nonsense has no future. As opposed to Kyle Rowland's libertarianism, which has the support of 1 to 3% of the American people. Tucker and his ilk want to throw away wealth as well. You need elites. Well, I'm not arguing with that. Whether an agglomeration of dumb hicks accomplishes something, it's because there were smart elite conspirators organizing them. I don't know, you might want to stay away from that line of argument, Kyle. You can't build an effective political movement without elites any more than you can build a skyscraper with only sand. And then he writes, the root of the disagreement by my lights is the issue of morality / sanctity / holiness. KMG wants the right to reclaim moral authority. Reclaim it from whom, I wonder? I don't think that's plausible. I'm a materialist. That's a shocker. I see moral authority as the product of organizations and conspiracies. Presently, those organizations are so thoroughly infiltrated by the left that it would take a miracle to convert them. I don't believe in miracles. Yeah, okay. All right. There was some robust responses to what Kyle had to say, as one might imagine. He just loves elite. Now, again, COVID-19 and this George Floyd madness, Kyle is a Panglossian, and he's fond of quoting Steven Pinker at left, that foolish, foolish man, that every day, in every way, things are getting better and better. It's all falling apart, Kyle. It's all falling apart. And what we learned from COVID-19 is all this talk about liberty and freedom. It's all just smoke. All just smoke. No one believes in this. No one really believes in it. Oh, you can't leave your apartment. Well, why not? Well, because there's a virus. There's lots of viruses out there. This is a virus unlike any other virus in human history. Don't you dare leave your apartment. You will be arrested. Don't you dare attend a protest. We will call you a murderer. How long is this regime, totalitarian regime, going to last? It'll end when we say it will end, and we reserve the right to reinstitute it. I don't know. I sincerely thought that what's happened this year might have knocked some sense into young Kyle. But no. He is what theologians call invincibly ignorant. There is nothing that could be said that is going to persuade Kyle. It's not going to happen. You know, if Kyle were to be placed in some sort of corporate gulag, but it's the free market, so you can't complain. Start your own multi-billion-dollar company. If you want something different, start your own communications network. Start your own banks. Yes. Big tech companies, he writes, are less censorious than other big media companies. Commercial elites are far more friendly to the right than the other elites. Sure they are. Companies obviously have commercial motive to censor. The left threatens boycotts and legislation. The public-private distinction remains. Yeah. Let's see. Untethered, with my old friend Dennis Dale, said, "Holy F, you're incoherent." He followed up, "The private-public distinction became meaningless years ago, and market forces are not driving the action of monopolies in censoring information. Companies are leaving money on the table to censor. The market is not driving this behavior." And again, when a company decides to eliminate two of its best known and best loved brands, Aunt Jemima and Uncle Ben's, they are not doing this based on market principles. Oh, we'll just bring out another brand of rice. Oh yeah, we'll bring out a brand of rice that everyone knows the name of. They grew up with this brand of rice. Yeah, that's going to take some doing. But there is relief coming, perhaps. This is from CNBC. The Department of Justice is taking aim at Tech's liability shield with the new set of legislative proposals released Wednesday. The proposed reforms are the latest action aiming to weaken legal protection established through a 1990s law known as Section 230, which protects online platforms from being held liable for content their users post on their sites. Yeah, this is the Communications Decency Act. I'm sorry, I said DCMA. I get them confused. But you see, they're just a carrier. This is what Google and Twitter and, Facebook and the rest of them are saying. They're just carriers. They're not publishers. Now, they have announced in so many words, or in these words, that they intend to be publishers. When you start censoring people, then you are a publisher. When you say this must come down, or we're not going to allow you to post this, or perhaps even worse, we're going to have a lengthy explainer in front of what you have written. That is publishing. Platforms could lose immunity if they facilitate or solicit federal criminal activity like trafficking illicit drugs. It would also create carve-outs for child exploitation, terrorism, and cyberstalking. Who's cyberstalking? That's all Facebook is used for. Women's cyberstalking. Boyfriends, ex-boyfriends, ex-husbands, would-be future husbands, rival women. That's what women use Facebook for, cyberstalking. Holding tech companies accountable for taking action on such content. The proposal would also make clear that Section 230 protections cannot be used to dispute antitrust claims. A significant statement is the Justice Department is reportedly preparing an antitrust suit against Google for as soon as this summer. Facebook has also disclosed an antitrust investigation by the Federal Trade Commission. And Josh Hawley, senator from Missouri, who is quite promising, seems to me. He said Wednesday he will introduce legislation that would give consumers grounds to sue companies like Facebook or Twitter over accusations of selective censorship of political speech. The limiting Section 230 immunity to Good Samaritans Act would prevent major online companies from receiving the protections of Section 230 of the Communications Decency Act unless they revise their terms of service to include pledges to operate in good faith and details of their content moderation policies, according to Hawley's office. The importance of Section 230 is this. If these tech companies were responsible for libelous material that appeared on any of the sites, on anything they own, or for solicitation to criminal acts or death threats of any of that, they would be arrested or they would be sued into oblivion. So the whole point of Section 230 is we are not publishers and we cannot be treated as publishers. We are merely carriers. But again, they have taken advantage of this and they are acting as publishers and so should be treated as such. From the Wall Street Journal, civil rights groups push for Facebook ad boycott. Several American civil rights groups, including the Anti-Defamation League and the NAACP, are encouraging big advertisers to pull spending from Facebook to protest what they see as the company's failure to make its platform a less hostile place. The campaign, announced Wednesday, comes after years of private discussions between these groups and Facebook, which the activists say have amounted to little change in the way, blah, blah, blah. Zuckerberg should just say, you don't like Facebook? Well, just get off Facebook then. Okay. You don't need to use Facebook. I don't use Facebook. I never saw the point of it. And when I learned that I was being monitored even when I was not on Facebook, I decided, no, I'm not going to have any part of this. Apparently Facebook, well, they let Donald Trump print stuff there, and that is unacceptable. Tim Kaine. Remember Tim Kaine? He's that creepy Joker-looking guy who was Hillary Clinton's Veep pick. Ooh, I'm seeing him wearing a bandana around his neck. He's a moron. He's an absolute moron. I would have thought that, being elected to the Senate of the United States and being, chosen Veep, you would have some level of intelligence, but I suppose not. He claimed during a Tuesday speech on the Senate floor that the United States created slavery and didn't inherit slavery from anybody. He urged his fellow senators to dismantle the structures of racism. What structures? that our federal, state, and local governments carefully erected and maintained over centuries. Of course, this is a metaphor, right? Are there actually racist buildings out there that need to be dismantled? I'm sure that there's a lot of people who think that there are, because we've learned that property itself is problematic. Apparently property has agency, and one shouldn't feel sympathy for property. Now, the old view was that property existed to serve people, but that was the old view. The first African Americans sent to the English colonies came to Point Comfort in 1619. They were slaves. They'd been captured against their will, but they landed in colonies that didn't have slavery. There were no laws about slavery at the time. The United States didn't inherit slavery from anybody. We created it. In a statement to National Review, Kane attempted to clarify his remarks. Quote, there was no law mandating slavery on our shores when African slaves came ashore in 1619. Did slavery already exist in the world? Of course, but not in the laws of colonial America at the time. We could have been a nation completely without the institution, but colonial legislatures and courts, and eventually the U.S. legal system, created the institution on our shores and maintained slavery until the 13th Amendment. As I said, we didn't inherit it. We chose to create it. Once again, Hilaire Belloc said that slavery was the default condition of humanity, and it is. I believe there were 7 million people in Gaul when Julius Caesar invaded. 2 million of them were killed. 2 million of them were taken as slaves. 2 million out of 7 million. That's an awful lot of slaves. Tiana Lowe writes in the Washington Examiner, it should be hard to botch an explanation of slavery in America quite this badly, referring to Senator Kane. It goes without saying that slavery is as old as civilization itself. It is globally outlawed today, but some 46 million people are still illegally enslaved. In 1619, the Spanish had introduced slavery to American soil a century earlier. Although the Spaniards had established an encomienda system rife with slavery in the 15th century Caribbean, it wasn't until 1526 that we know they brought back the first black slaves to either Georgia or South Carolina, both in the original 13 colonies and thus part of the United States from the nation's founding. The purchase of African slaves was prolific among the British for nearly a century before 1619, and at that time, white Britons were in the midst of a 3-century period of being enslaved by Barbary pirates from North Africa. The British government essentially let it happen, a grievance the people took so badly that it was included as an entry in the Grand Remonstrance, which eventually led to the English Civil War. Now, if you talk about the tens of thousands of Irish that Oliver Cromwell captured in Ireland and transported to the Caribbean to work as slaves, no, that's not the same. How dare you? How dare you? They were merely indentured servants. And how many of them died? How many thousands of these Irishmen died in the heat and the humidity of the Caribbean with the back-breaking work and all? Now, I wanted to talk about religion for a few minutes. COVID-19 has perhaps dealt a death blow to organized religion. Apparently, church services are going to resume, but with social distancing and perhaps with masks. How that would work is an interesting question. And, oh no, you just need to do it digitally. Oh, and you don't need the sacraments. Oh, we've taught for hundreds and hundreds of years that the sacraments, the 7 sacraments, are essential. And they are of, a great value, tremendous value to Christians. But now you can do all this virtually, digitally. Philip Jenkins, writing in Chronicles, and I believe Professor Jenkins is I think he's an Episcopalian. I think he is. He has a piece in Chronicles called Praying Alone. When Americans look back on 2020, the year of the virus, they will see multiple transformations. I fear that some of the most sweeping changes will come in the realm of religion, marking a grim turning point in the history of American faith. Historically, pandemics have played a major role in shaping religion by undermining older religious establishments and sometimes by boosting new and more energetic faiths. They do not actually create new trends or movements, but rather accelerate them at rocket sled pace. In the US, long-term trends were already pressing hard towards secularization. Sharp decline of US fertility rates, which presently look quite Scandinavian. Another example of the trend is the surging growth since 2008 of the nuns, those rejecting any religious affiliation regardless of spiritual belief. At last count, America's nuns had surpassed Catholics and were roughly equal in number to the self-identified evangelicals. The virus's effect on American religion will depend on if, when, and whether there's a significant post-virus economic recovery. I would have to disagree with Professor Jenkins on that. Let's think more broadly, he writes. In 2000, Robert Putnam's famous book, Bowling Alone, stressed the vital significance of social capital in sustaining communities. This is expressed through collective participation in clubs, societies, and religious institutions. All such activities are presently impossible or prohibited for an unknown period of time. The more we lose the habits of sociability and joining, and the more our social intercourse occurs through a computer screen or a cell phone, the less likely it is those older ways will ever be regained or reconstructed. The present crisis will so disrupt our remaining social connections that I honestly wonder when or how faith communities can ever regroup and restore themselves. I think two of the roles presently denied to churches and clergy in the coronavirus era, the most devoted and heroic thing a cleric can do is to avoid physical contact or proximity with the faithful throughout the worst of their sickness and bereavement. I would have to disagree. Patients die alone, or at least not surrounded by faith and family. Even when churches can reopen for regular services, Lord knows when people will resume the habit of organizing large gatherings for weddings or funerals. People are going to be phobic about large and crowded gatherings for years to come. Nobody will condemn clergy for failing to perform their essential functions. Everyone recognizes our unique situation. Well, I do condemn them. Over and above the other trends, the present crisis has brought on a change of consciousness in transforming how we think about such fundamental matters as place, presence, and participation. This past Easter, for instance, I attended communion service. I visited with a person at an online Bible study. Someone else dropped in to visit. All of these events took place electronically viewed on a screen. There are a lot of martyrs in the Catholic Church who are associated with the care of the sick. One of the most famous is Saint Peter Claver, or Pedro Claver y Corbero, 1580 to 1654. He is considered to be the greatest apostle to the slaves of South America. He exposed himself to terrible, terrible conditions. He was very close to large numbers of disease-ridden people. He was personally responsible for the baptism of 300,000 people. He heard 5,000 slave confessions every year. He insisted on living in slave quarters, despite the fact that they were disgusting and obviously unhealthy. And let's see, in the last years, I'm reading from Wikipedia, in the last years of his life, Peter was too ill to leave his room. He lingered for 4 years, largely forgotten and neglected, physically abused and starved by an ex-slave who had been hired by his superior to care for him. He never complained about his treatment, accepting it as a just punishment for his sins. When the people of the city heard of his death, many forced their way into his room to pay their last respects. Such was his reputation for holiness that they stripped away anything to serve as a relic. The city magistrates, who had previously considered him a nuisance for his persistent advocacy on behalf of the slaves, ordered a public funeral, and he was buried with pomp and ceremony. Here's a more famous saint, Father Damien, or Saint Damien of Moloch, was a Dutch priest. He was a priest from Belgium, and he ministered to the lepers on Moloch. And, well, he, these were people who were abandoned by everyone with terrible, grotesque affliction. And of course, he died of leprosy. And I'll give you another example. There are many such examples, but Herman Cohen was a Father Augustine Mary, or Father Herman. It's a remarkable story because he was a piano virtuoso, and he practically grew up in the household of Franz Liszt. He was very fond of him and called him Putzi. They had a falling out over money. Cohen had severe money problems, and there was suggestion that he had stolen money from Liszt. They made up later. Cohen, who of course was Jewish, he converted to Catholicism, and he was given. He became one of the most famous preachers in Europe. He was given the permission to start his own order, and he died in Spandau prison in Berlin in 1871. I guess he considers himself a Frenchman, and he was ministering to French prisoners after the Franco-Prussian War, and he contracted tuberculosis and died. And apparently, Catholic priests were capable of such acts of heroism in the past, but now it's considered unthinkable that a Catholic priest would risk his health for the faith of his people. One wonders what they think that their job is. My own cathedral in downtown Victoria, St. Andrew's, it was closed for months. It's not a very welcoming place. I'll just read from the latest church bulletin. Church doors will be open for Mass 30 minutes prior to the scheduled Mass, providing that the church has been sanitized after the previous Mass. Entry to Mass is by prior registration. Mass registration is for cathedral parishioners only and not friends and others from other parishes. Call this number or email to register a place at Mass. Let's see, Masses are at the final times, and I see that full. Okay. Well, if you haven't booked your place, too late. Please note that you're asked to attend only one Mass per week. Find a Mass and let that be your Mass of the week. No Sunday obligation to attend Mass for anyone. Because Sunday's not a special day in Christianity. If you are registered for Mass and you do not show without giving us notice, your name will be removed from all future registration. All people must be registered for Mass. Your registration is not confirmed until you have received a reply to your email or your phone call. We need to know the names of everyone from your family who will be attending and not just the numbers. We cannot exceed 50 persons, although large crowds are not expected. Yes, with a friendly welcome like that, the cathedral will probably hold about 1,000 people. And I've been in it several times when it has been full. We cannot exceed 50 persons, although large crowds are not expected. Music will be offered. You may bring your missal if you wish. None will be provided. Masses will be mainly quiet at this initial stage and might even be called, as they were in former days, low Mass. Well, actually, I quite like that, because Catholics, especially these days, are terrible at singing, and the hymns are rubbish. No one will be admitted to Mass once the doors are closed. Actually, they will be locked. This will not prevent anyone inside from leaving should they so desire, as they are all fire doors, but it will prevent anyone from entering. Be certain to set your alarms accordingly. We are bound to follow protocols. Yeah, the protocols of Jesus Christ, not that important these days. And this is an important one, as people cannot simply wander in at will. Yes, very welcoming parish, St. Andrew's. Let's see what's going on in the chat here. If Spencer's really in trouble, Colin Liddell will be in a great mood in his next Luke Ford appearance. I don't know. I don't follow Richard Spencer news. Media Hit says only women care about status. That's not true. Men care about status as well, but women care intently about it. and they are far more sophisticated about it, and they understand. Well, they understand far more gradations in status than men do. Oh, is there some suggestion that Richard Spencer is going to be imprisoned? Okay. One Hermann Cohen was a famous Kantian philosopher. Yes, I know that. But of course, there's an awful lot of people, or there were at the time, named Hermann Cohen. Alex Large says, LOL, Spencer isn't going to prison. I don't know what this is in reference to. Okay. Albus Dumbledore says not all slaves were treated bad, but a lot were. No, I mean, that's true. And there's typically a distinction made between house slaves and field slaves. In fact, it's become a common term of abuse among Black people to refer to Black people who are not sufficiently radical as house slaves. Oh, I see. This is the basis of it. YT, Richard Spencer has sent out mass email asking for attorney money. Why would anyone give him money? Eternal Fisherman says that Angela Merkel had very good grades in Russian in Eastern German school. Well, I'm not surprised. Her father was the Red Pastor. Her father actually moved from West Germany to East Germany. Yeah, how about that? Dutton was talking about Peter Turchin's theory of the overproduction of aspirational elites as a cause of social destabilization, i.e. widespread rioting, writes Ashi Bravo. And I think this is very important. This explains so much, and we've seen this overproduction in the past. You could look at the Khmer Rouge as a result of this process. That we have so many people graduating from university, and they have been led to believe that they are going to join the elite. There's no spaces for them. There's not all that many spaces, and they're full. And it's the spaces are increasingly awarded on an oligarchical basis. Well, tell me about your parents. My parents are nobodies. Well, it's nice knowing you. Let's get back to it here. Oh, some COVID news. Airlines ban alcohol on planes in response to COVID-19. That's going to raise everyone's spirits. Airlines including EasyJet and KLM in Europe, Delta Airlines and American Airlines in the United States, and Asia's Virgin Australia are spending all or part of their alcoholic drink service in response to COVID-19. It's part of a widespread revision of the industry's food and drink service to minimize interaction between crew and passengers and to ensure a safer journey for all. With face masks already mandatory on pretty much all flights around the world and new legislation introduced in January 2020 to curb antisocial behavior on flights, it's another in a line of barriers, literal and legal, to getting high in the sky. Yes, let's not have any human contact between the passengers and the staff, because human contact is bad. Many people, such as myself, are absolutely terrified flying, and I have found that this can be treated with alcohol. But no, we can't have that anymore. It's just going to be, I don't know, it'd be like a cattle car. I mean, you can see that they're looking forward to this because, the flight attendants, they routinely consider themselves to be extremely hard done by. No food, no drink, but of course you won't be able to bring on your own food or drink. Perhaps they could have drip feeds for passengers. From the Sun, the London Sun, keep your dog socially distanced 6 feet from other pets and owners to avoid it catching coronavirus, U.S. agency warns. This is from the Food and Drug Administration. I guess it's a good sign if we're worrying about, dogs getting it, because it's all over here, certainly where I live. Nonetheless, mandatory mask laws are spreading in Canada, mostly targeted at transportation so far, but calls are growing for more widespread application. No one is dying in British Columbia anymore from COVID-19. There's 168 total since the so-called pandemic began. As I pointed out the other day, In the month of May alone, in the city of Vancouver alone, there were 170 fatal drug overdoses. But no, let's all wear masks. Put on your face diapers, people. And in hilarious news, Canada loses its bid for a seat on the UN Security Council. Canada was just bribing up a storm in Africa and elsewhere because, the world needs more Canada, and the world has decided that the amount of Canada that it has is quite enough. Thank you very much. And, I used to write about legal issues for a magazine. So I ran into Corrections Canada, the Correctional Service Canada, and the incompetence of these people is a wonder to behold. I remember interviewing the warden, or whatever you'd be called, of the Edmonton Max prison. And there had been a whole bunch of fatal drug overdoses. So I was talking to this fellow, and I asserted that there was a drug problem at the prison. He said, there's no drug problem in the prison. I said, there have been 3 fatal drug overdoses, in the last couple of months. Oh, he didn't consider that to be, a drug problem. And then I asked him about, measures to prevent drugs from getting into the prisons. And he said, such as, people talking through glass, that sort of thing, searching. And he said, no, we're not going to do that. Why not? Oh, because we see our job as, reintegration into the community. This is a local story here in Victoria, but also a national story. 9 prisoners have been moved from the William Head Minimum Security Prison to more secure institutions, following the escape of 2 inmates now charged with killing a man while they were on the run. James Lee Bush and Zachary Armitage escaped from the Victoria Area Prison on July 7th and were caught 2 days later, July 7th last year. On Friday, the RCMP announced the escapees had been charged with first-degree murder of 60-year-old Martin Payne while the prisoners were unlawfully at large. In the aftermath of the escape, the Correctional Service of Canada launched a review of every inmate in minimum security custody across the country. That review led the department to reclassify 14 minimum security offenders and move them to medium security prisons. 9 of the 14 inmates the Correctional Service found to be misclassified were at William Head, including Armitage and Bush. Both Bush and Armitage were violent offenders before they were charged with killing Payne. Bush was serving a life sentence for second-degree murder, and Armitage, who had previously escaped from custody multiple times, was serving a sentence for aggravated assault and robbery. Okay, you have one fellow, a life sentence for second-degree murder, and he is in a minimum security prison. But even worse, Armitage, aggravated assault and robbery, and had previously escaped from custody multiple times, and he's put in a minimum security prison from which he easily escapes and kills a 60-year-old man. In a just world, the bureaucrats at Corrections Service Canada would be held directly responsible for this man's death. But that's not how it works in my country. And finally, I want to talk about Kristen Stewart. She is just so very, very versatile. She can play anything. I mean, she's like one of those English actors, like Jason Isaacs, someone like that. It's just, you could imagine her playing it. No, you can't. She's a potato-faced lesbian miserablist. And we learn that she is going to be playing Diana, Princess of Wales, in a new biopic called Spencer. And it was amusing because several news outlets had side-by-side photographs. And Kristen Stewart, she is a potato-faced lesbian miserablist. As someone, I don't remember the name, sorry, responded to me on Twitter, she looks like a weird boy. Yes, she does. Whereas Diana, who became the Princess of Wales, won the hearts of people all over the world because she was seemingly the most winsome woman on earth. Kristen Stewart previously played Jean Seberg, the troubled American actress, who was as unlike Kristen Stewart as is possible to imagine. If you see, say, Jean Seberg in Breathless, you will see an absolutely captivating young woman, as fresh as can be. Somewhat naive, somewhat sophisticated at the same time, an enchanting a woman. Kristen Stewart is, well, someone is quoted here as saying she is wrong on so many levels. She is weird looking. I don't know. There have been rumors about her for years, supposedly citing that she's going to transition. Oh, I see. Casey Orsick says Kristen Stewart has the personality of a potato. I think Margot Robbie would have been a better choice to play Princess Diana. Perhaps they could find an actress who is not hard looking, or is capable of playing a woman, who seems soft, who seems like womanly. The two things I've seen Margot Robbie in, I finally did see Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, and she plays Sharon Tate. She was a terrible choice to play Sharon Tate because, again, Sharon Tate was a fulsome, doe-eyed beauty of a type that has been exiled from Hollywood for decades. Sharon Tate showed up today. People wouldn't say, whoa, wow. They'd say, you're too fat. You're too fat. You're going to have to lose a lot of weight. Why don't you look at Kristen Stewart? Why don't you try and be thin and unpleasant looking? I don't know what this woman has done, Kristen Stewart, so that she just has such a charmed life. But like, since what was the Hunger Games? Is that what she was in? Like, what has she done? Like, where are her hits? Presumably a movie about the Princess of Wales. I gather this is a prestige project and it's Oscar bait, or it's meant to be very popular. And Kristen Stewart hasn't had a hit for quite some time. I don't know, it's exasperating to me that, I'm constantly being bullied. We're all being bullied. And, everyone loves Kristen Stewart. What are you talking about? Oh, that Kristen Stewart. Isn't she so sexy? No, she isn't. Not in the slightest. I saw her in this movie called Adventureland, which is it's not a bad movie. It's got its points. And so she plays this kind of goth girl, all right? And Jesse Eisenberg is besotted with her because she wears, original Ziggy Stardust T-shirts or whatever, But what I find really amusing about this film is, she just plays the same miserablest. Ooh, apparently she's got a mysterious past or something. She is just not interesting. But anyway, Jesse Eisenberg gets set up on a date with this girl called Lisa P., played by Margarita Laviva. And this girl is prettier by far, sexier by far, and nicer by far than Kristen Stewart's character. But Jesse Eisenberg's character, I don't know, there's plenty of beautiful women out there. No, there aren't. There's plenty of, good-looking women who are really nice. No, they're not. Kristen Stewart, she's got those T-shirts from the 70s. So I think I'm going to go with her. I don't know. It's just, it's exasperating. Anyway, let's have a final look at the chat. Okay. Tucker has an episode on the Atlanta Cop we'll definitely watch later. Clark Cost says the sound of Kevin's typing reminds me of a babbling brook. I am deeply sorry about that. There's nothing I can do about it under current situations. I might get one of those drawers that you put under the desk so that the sound is obscured. Jesse Eisenberg is another baffling phenomenon, writes Octopus Knight. Why is he successful? He's absolutely unwatchable. I don't know. I thought that he was good in The Social Network, and I saw him in that movie The Double, based on Dostoevsky's novel, which was directed by the British comedian, or the Norwegian-Nigerian comedian, Richard Ayoade. It was a very amusing, very intelligent fellow. Yes, Michael Mabus likes Sharon Tate. Yeah, she had a short career, and she didn't appear in that many films, which were decent, but certainly one of the great beauties in Hollywood history. But as I've mentioned before, Hollywood does not like beautiful people. It simply doesn't, and it's not just women. Robert Redford was deprecated for decades because he was simply too good looking. So he had to destroy his looks by spending all his time in the sun. You see a similar thing with Brad Pitt. Brad Pitt was deprecated for decades. And it's only now that, he's over 50, that he's getting the respect that he deserves. Emma Watson is at least British, but she's also a miserablest. Indeed, she is. And turning on Rowling. Well, these people have no sense of loyalty, no sense of loyalty at all. So I am going to wrap it up for the day. Tomorrow is Theater Thursday, and we are going to be discussing Fassbinder's film about the Wirtschaftswunder, Germany's economic miracle, the marriage of Maria Braun. Tomorrow. On Friday, we're going to be discussing Philip K. Dick's classic, The Man in the High Castle. Thank you all for tuning in. If you like the show or any part of it, I'd greatly appreciate it if you would click on the like button and subscribe to my YouTube channel if you have not already. If you would like to contribute to the show, and I must confess that this would be sorely needed at this time, my PayPal address is kevin_grace@hotmail.com. Again, kevin_grace@hotmail.com. And I will leave you with my traditional benediction and farewell in these days of total atomization and destruction of civilization. I do dearly hope that all of my dear viewers manage to find some genuine human connection in order to ease the burden. Thank you. Good night.